James Morrison had been blind since birth, but he could see music in ways that most sighted people never would. At 28, he had been playing guitar on the corner of 14th Street and Union Square for 4 years, ever since he'd moved to New York City with dreams that seemed impossible to everyone except him. His fingers knew every crack in the sidewalk around his usual spot, every echo pattern the buildings created, every subtle change in foot traffic that indicated the time of day or weather conditions. What made James extraordinary wasn't just his technical skill, though his finger-picking technique was flawless and his voice had a richness that stopped strangers in their tracks. It was the way he transformed every song he played into something deeply personal. Without the ability to see his audience, James had developed an almost supernatural ability to feel their emotions, to sense when someone needed to hear a particular lyric or melody, and to adjust his performance accordingly. On this particular Thursday afternoon in October, James was working through his usual repertoire of covers and original compositions when he decided to attempt something he had been practicing in his small East Village apartment for weeks, All Too Well, by Taylor Swift. The song had captured James's imagination not because he was a particular fan of pop music. His background was more rooted in folk and blues, but because when he heard it, he recognized something profound in the songwriting structure. The way the verses built emotional tension, the devastating honesty of the bridge, the way the melody seemed to carry years of accumulated heartbreak. It reminded him of the great storytelling traditions he had grown up with. But James's interpretation of All Too Well was unlike any version that had ever been performed. He played it slower, more contemplatively, with intricate finger-picking patterns that highlighted the song's underlying melancholy. His voice, weathered by years of street performance and infused with the authentic emotion of someone who had experienced profound loss, transformed Taylor's personal narrative into something universal and timeless. "I walked through the door with you. The air was cold," James began, his voice immediately drawing the attention of passers-by who recognized something special in his delivery. But something about it felt like home somehow. As James played, his interpretation revealed layers in the song that even careful listeners might have missed. He emphasized different words than Taylor did in her original version, finding new emotional meanings in familiar phrases. When he sang "And You Call Me Up Again Just to Break Me Like a Promise," his voice cracked not from technical limitation but from genuine understanding of what those words meant to someone who had been abandoned before. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the haunting beauty of James's performance. But what they didn't know was that Taylor Swift herself was among them, having stopped during her afternoon walk through Union Square when she heard the familiar opening chords of her song being played with such exquisite care. Taylor had been having a difficult week, struggling with some personal issues and feeling disconnected from her own music. She had been questioning whether her songs really meant anything to people or if they were just entertainment, background noise for people's busy lives. But hearing All Too Well interpreted by someone who clearly understood its emotional core on such a deep level was profoundly moving. As James reached the bridge, the most challenging part of the song both technically and emotionally, Taylor found herself crying. Not because his performance was perfect, though it was beautiful, but because he was singing her words with such authentic understanding that it felt like he was telling his own story. "And you were there, you remember it all too well," James sang, and in his voice Taylor heard not just her own experiences of heartbreak, but every person who had ever been left behind, every relationship that had ended badly, every moment when love had turned to loss. When the song ended, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. James smiled in the direction of the sound, his unseeing eyes somehow managing to convey gratitude and connection with his audience. Several people dropped bills into his guitar case, and a few made specific requests for other songs. But Taylor remained standing at the edge of the small crowd, processing what she had just experienced. She realized that this blind street musician had just taught her something about her own song, that great art transcends the circumstances of its creation and becomes whatever the listener needs it to be. "Excuse me," Taylor said, approaching James as the crowd began to disperse. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to tell you that was the most beautiful version of that song I've ever heard." James turned toward the sound of her voice, his expression brightening. "Thank you so much, that means a lot to me." It's one of my favorite songs to play, though I know I take some liberties with the arrangement." "The liberties are what made it extraordinary," Taylor replied, still not identifying herself. "You didn't just play the song, you understood it. You found things in it that I think even the songwriter might not have realized were there." "Music is funny that way," James said, beginning to pack up his guitar. "Sometimes the best songs mean different things to different people. That's how you know they're really special, when they can carry everyone's stories, not just the person who wrote them." Taylor felt a lump forming in her throat. Here was a street musician who understood the power of music in ways that many professional artists never would. "Can I ask you something? How did you learn to play like that?" "Practice, mostly," James said with a laugh. "And listening. When you can't see, you learn to really hear things. Not just the notes, but the emotions behind them. Music becomes like a language that you can speak fluently." "And, all too well, specifically, what drew you to that song?" James paused in his packing, considering the question. "There's something about the way it's written that reminds me of the old folk songs I grew up with. It tells a complete story, it doesn't shy away from pain, and it finds beauty in sadness. Plus, the melody is just gorgeous. It gives you room to add your own interpretation without losing the essential meaning." Taylor realized she was having one of the most insightful conversations about her own work that she had ever experienced. "Would you mind if I asked you to play it one more time? I promise this isn't a strange request. There's just something about your version that I need to hear again." "Of course," James said, pulling his guitar back out. "Are you a musician yourself? You seem to really understand music in a way that most people don't." "I am," Taylor said carefully. "I write songs, actually." "I'd love to hear some of your work sometime," James replied as he began tuning his guitar. "There's always room for more storytellers in the world." As James began playing All Too Well for the second time, Taylor made a decision that surprised even her. She began humming along softly, then gradually added vocal harmony to James's lead vocals. Her voice blended perfectly with his, creating a duet that was both intimate and powerful. James's face showed surprise and delight as he realized that his mysterious listener was not just a music lover but a talented performer in her own right. He adjusted his playing to create space for her voice, and together they created a version of the song that was more beautiful than either of them could have achieved alone. "I've been spending the last 8 months thinking about you, but now I'm thinking about me," they sang together, their voices intertwining in a way that made the lyrics feel fresh and newly meaningful. A new crowd had gathered, drawn by the unexpected duet between the familiar street musician and the unknown woman, whose voice seemed to transform the entire performance. Phones came out, but the audience was more focused on listening than recording. They seemed to understand that they were witnessing something special and spontaneous. When the song ended, James turned toward Taylor with an expression of amazement. "That was incredible. You have an extraordinary voice. Have you recorded anything professionally?" Taylor felt the moment of truth approaching. She could continue the anonymity, thank James for the collaboration, and disappear back into her regular life. But something about his genuine appreciation for music, his lack of ego, and his obvious talent made her want to be honest with him. "James," Taylor said, her voice becoming clearer and more recognizable as she dropped the casual disguise she had been maintaining, "I need to tell you something. The song we just performed, I wrote it." James's expression changed from confusion to disbelief to wonder. "You wrote All Too Well? But that would mean you're—" "Taylor Swift," she confirmed. "And I have to tell you, hearing you perform that song taught me things about my own work that I never understood before. You didn't just sing it. You inhabited it. You made it yours while still honoring what it was meant to be." The crowd that had gathered for their duet was beginning to realize what was happening. Whispers of recognition spread through the group as people recognized Taylor's voice and face, but instead of chaos, there was a sense of reverence for the musical moment they had just witnessed. "I can't believe this is happening," James said, shaking his head in wonder. "I've been playing your songs for months, trying to understand them from the inside out. And now you're here telling me that my interpretations taught you something. This is surreal." "It's not surreal. It's exactly what music is supposed to do," Taylor replied. "It's supposed to create connections between people, to help us understand each other better. What you did with that song, the way you found your own story in my lyrics, that's the highest compliment a songwriter can receive." Taylor paused, looking at James and then at the crowd that had gathered. "James, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll consider it seriously. I'd love to record some music with you, not as a favor or a charity project, but because you're a real artist who has something important to say, and I think our voices work beautifully together." James was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. "Are you serious? You'd want to collaborate with a street musician who plays covers for tips?" "I'd want to collaborate with a musician who understands songs so deeply that he can make them better just by interpreting them honestly," Taylor corrected. "The fact that you perform on street corners doesn't diminish your artistry. If anything, it proves it. You've been connecting with audiences and moving people with nothing but your talent and authenticity." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Taylor learning about James's background, his original compositions, and his dreams for his musical career. But more than discussing business possibilities, they talked about songwriting craft, about the responsibility that comes with creating music that moves people, and about the importance of staying connected to the emotional truth that makes songs matter. Before they parted ways, Taylor insisted on exchanging contact information with James, but not before they performed one more song together. This time, one of James's original compositions, a haunting ballad about finding hope in darkness that showcased his abilities as both a performer and a songwriter. 3 months later, James Morrison released his first professional recording, an EP produced with Taylor's support, but showcasing his own artistic vision. The lead single was his version of All Too Well, which had been recorded in a way that captured the intimacy and authenticity of their street corner performance. But perhaps more meaningful than the commercial success was what the collaboration had meant to both artists. For Taylor, working with James had reconnected her with the pure joy of making music with someone who shared her passion for songwriting craft and emotional honesty. For James, the recognition had validated years of dedication to his art and opened doors to opportunities he had only dreamed about. The corner of 14th Street and Union Square, where they had first performed together, became a pilgrimage site for musicians and Taylor Swift fans alike. A small plaque was eventually installed that read, "Music lives here, where strangers become collaborators and songs find new meanings." But James continued to perform on street corners throughout the city, not because he had to, but because he believed that music belonged in public spaces where anyone could discover it. His regular audiences grew to include music industry professionals, tourists, and local residents who had learned to expect something special from the blind musician whose interpretations could reveal new depths in familiar songs. Years later, when James had established himself as a respected recording artist and touring performer, he would often tell interviewers about the day Taylor Swift stopped to listen to him play her own song. But he always emphasized that the most important thing about that encounter wasn't meeting a celebrity. It was discovering that great music creates connections between people regardless of their circumstances. "She taught me that songs don't belong to the people who write them," James would say. "They belong to everyone who finds meaning in them." When you truly understand a song, when you let it become part of your own story, you're not just performing it, you're completing it. For Taylor, the memory of James's interpretation of All Too Well became a touchstone for her own artistic development. It reminded her that the most successful songs aren't just the ones that reach the most people, but the ones that reach people deeply enough to become part of their own emotional vocabulary. The collaboration between them continued over the years, with James contributing to several of Taylor's albums and Taylor appearing as a guest on James's recordings. But their creative partnership was built on mutual respect and shared artistic values rather than celebrity charity or marketing strategy. Their street corner duet remained one of the most talked about spontaneous musical moments in New York City history, not because of who was involved, but because it captured something essential about what happens when authentic artists meet and recognize each other's dedication to their craft. And whenever James performed All Too Well in concert venues around the world, he would always dedicate it, quote, to Taylor, who taught me that the best songs are the ones that help us see ourselves more clearly, and to everyone who has ever found their own story in someone else's lyrics.